All right, it's 1 o'clock. We'll get going. And hello, everyone. Welcome to our Rural Town Centers and Corridors Program Project Selection Workshop. I'm Doug Cox with PSRC's Transportation Planning Team, and thanks for joining us today. A few housekeeping items before we start. This is a workshop set up as a meeting and not a webinar. So go ahead and raise your hand if you want to ask a question and be ready to turn on your camera and mic when we call on you. We'll pause periodically to respond to questions, but depending on how many we get, we might need to put some in the parking lot and come back to them at the end. If you have any technical difficulties with Zoom, please reach out using the Q&A feature, and we'll do our best to help you with that. We want to encourage you to look at our RTCC webpage for all the information you might need about this competition. And this workshop will be recorded, and so we'll post the recording and the slides to that website shortly afterwards today. So today we are going to provide some background on the RTCC program. We'll talk about the various requirements to be eligible to participate in this competition. We'll talk about the screening form process, which is a critical step that needs to be completed prior to responding to the scored project evaluation criteria that we'll also cover. We'll go over the schedule of the key milestones in the process, and we'll show you where you can find the detailed resources that we have available on our website to help you as you complete your screening forms and applications, in case you haven't found those already. And we'll wrap up with a demo of the online screening form and application. And of course, take your questions. So we'll keep the info at a pretty high level for today, but let us know what your questions are as we're covering all this over the next hour or so. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer to get us started.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jennifer Barnes, and I'm Program Manager in the Transportation Planning Department here at PSRC. Doug, you can go to the next slide if you'd like. I'm going to give you a little bit of background information and then talk through the screening form requirements, which are basically the eligibility requirements for this competition. So our Rural Town Centers and Corridors, or RTCC is our shorthand for that program, is a set aside from our FHWA funds. The funds are actually Surface Transportation Block Grant Funds, or STBG. We've had this competition around for about over 20 years now, and this was established by our board specifically to recognize rural communities and assist, and make some funding available to implement transportation improvements in rural town centers. So it is a set aside. This time around, we've got a little over $6 million available for the program years of 2027 and 2028. So that splits up to be a little over $3 million for each of those program years. And in this competition, we are allowing requests up to that full amount that would be available in 1 year. Of course, if you request the full amount, you will need to have a very high score, but that is our limit. So go ahead, Doug, to the next slide. Just a little bit of background. We do have a policy framework for our federal funds. This is a very detailed set of policies and procedures that are adopted by our executive board prior to each funding cycle. So our current policy framework was adopted in 2024 before last year's biennial competition. We do distribute funds, I'm saying approximately every 2 to 3 years. Historically, it's been every 2 years, but we have had some delays happening within this last year or so. It's been about 2.5 years since the last RTCC competition, just based on some of the additional review that we've needed to do with some of the federal rules. We do program funds into the future, and as mentioned, this competition is for funds that are available for the fiscal years of 2027 and 2028. And our policy framework is the implementation of our Vision 2050 policies. So the evaluation criteria in particular are really based on Vision 2050. Next slide, please. I also want to mention today we're going to talk mostly about the application process, of course, but just want to make sure you're aware of some of our procedures that are in place and required for projects that do receive PSRC awards of FHWA funds. We have every year we have a delivery target, an amount of dollars that need to be delivered. So when we award funds for a particular year, those funds are all part of that target that we need to deliver. So we do have a lot of policies in place to make sure that, to the extent that possible, that projects are delivered in a timely manner, that we minimize delays. If we don't meet our target, we risk reduction in federal funds that come to the region. So our staff, once we've awarded funds, our staff puts a lot of energy into monitoring the progress of the projects that receive those funds. We have project tracking policies that are available on our website, and they have all of our specific procedures on how we monitor and how we make adjustments to make sure that our targets are met each year, and to address just all of our processes. We do require progress report to be submitted for every project that has received PSRC funds from the time that those funds are awarded through the project completion. So we do put a lot of emphasis on obligation of our funds, of getting those funds to the point where they can be expended. But even after the funds are obligated, we monitor the progress of projects until they are complete. So we do ask for a progress report at usually once per year. By our policies, we can ask for it up to twice per year. It kind of depends. We do a lot of coordination. So a lot of the time, that second time of the year, we determine we kind of know enough of what's going on with all the projects that we don't require it. But at least once per year, there is a progress report that needs to be completed, submitted to PSRC, that just gives us all the information about how if the project is on track, if it's behind, if there are delays, if there are cost increases. All of that is included in the progress report. As mentioned, each project award is tied to a specific fiscal year. And so the fiscal year goes from October 1st of the previous calendar year to September 30th of the year that we're in. So right now we are in the fiscal year of 2026. And that the 2026 fiscal year goes through the end of September of this year. Then October 1st, we will then be in fiscal year 2027. So with the funds that are being awarded in this process, we do have 2027 funds that are being awarded. So those funds will be available and needed to be obligated in 2027 if that's the year that they are awarded. Each project award that is awarded, that, like I said, is awarded for a specific year. Those projects have an obligation deadline of June 1st of that fiscal year. So once again, we're in 2026. Any project with 2026 funds needs to submit their obligation package by June 1st. And the reason for this is it gets submitted to WSDOT. WSDOT has to do all of the review and make sure everything is set for meeting all of the requirements for the FHWA requirements. So our deadline is set so that WSDOT has enough time to do that review and work with sponsors to make sure any loose ends are tied up in time for all of the projects in our state to have delivered by the end of the fiscal year. Our project tracking policies do lay out the circumstances under which an extension can be requested if a project is delayed. We have a short-term extension of 45 days or a longer one of 1 year. In both cases, there's a lot of review that happens, and it needs to be confirmed that the reason for delay was due to factors beyond the sponsor's control. So we go through that process every year. Just letting you know that is something that is in our policies, but of course our hope is that everybody can deliver in the year that the funds are awarded. Next slide. So I want to talk about eligibility. The screening process the screening form process really is all about confirming all of the things that we need to confirm to make sure that a project is eligible to compete in any given competition. So for RTCC, We do have an eligibility requirement based on the location of the project, since this is supporting rural areas and rural town centers. A project must be located outside what we call the region's contiguous urban growth area, or UGA. And that's basically everything on this map that's gray. So all of the smaller towns that are outside the UGA are in general the sponsors that are eligible to compete for these funds, as well as unincorporated county. Next, please. So even though it's a rural area, the project still needs to be provide a benefit to a rural town center. And so we ask in our forms what rural town center is being supported by the project that is being proposed. So it can be located within the rural town center, or it could be shown to provide a connection, improve a connection to a rural town center. And mentioned already that this is a set aside of the STBG fund. So as far as the scope elements of a project, all of the STBG scope eligibility applies to this competition as well. We do have a resource on our webpage that lays out all of the scope elements that are eligible for STBG. This is the broadest category of the FHWA funding. So most projects that we see would be eligible for STBG funds. But doing that review of the scope elements is part of what we are doing when we do our screening form review. Next, please. So for the RTCC competition, we have two categories of project that can be, for which funds can be requested. One is the capital transportation project. There is a requirement that any capital project is the outcome of a public planning process, and these are public dollars, so it needs to be a public, transparent process that leads to the development of that project. That is reflected in an adopted plan. We also have a category for transportation planning study. And in this case, we just ask for a clear definition of the study components and how it supports rural town centers and corridor objectives. Next, please. Here's a list of other things that we look at, and I won't spend a lot of time on this slide because I'm going to describe each of these in more detail on following slides, but consistency with regional and local plans, federal functional classification, there's requirements associated with bike and ped facilities, and then also project readiness and finance. But each of these, as mentioned, I will talk about a little bit more now. So this is just a reminder of the kind of the major components from your perspective of this process. So screening form, that's what I'm talking about now. And so this is where the sponsors provide all the key information that we need to confirm eligibility. We review this information, and we do provide opportunity to make corrections and clarifications before a sponsor moves on to the funding application, which is the next big piece of this. That includes all of the screening form information with those corrections and clarifications made. We do have our system set up so that you do not need to re-enter that information. But then the funding application also is where you provide all of the responses to the actual evaluation criteria questions, which are the scored part of this process. And then for this competition, we also ask for project presentations, and we'll talk about schedule later, but this is just an opportunity after the funding application is submitted for sponsor to share project highlights. So this is both with the scoring team, PSRC, and also the broader evaluation committee are invited to attend that. So provide the highlights, and it also gives an opportunity to provide any last clarifications. Next, please. So back to the screening form. The purpose is, as I said, to verify the eligibility of a project. So for the considerations, I've already mentioned this a little bit, but we have a deadline for submittal of the screening form of March 6th. And this is just all of this it's really the description. It's not the reasons for the projects or the benefit of the project. It's basically the description and alignment with our various policies. We have really specific and detailed guidance. We have we call it checklist and guidance that is available on our website. Just can't encourage you strongly enough to check that guidance. It's set up so that you can kind of have it next to your screen as you're filling out the application. So it provides a lot of detail on what we're looking for, provides some links to some additional information, provides who you can call if you have a question or need a clarification. So just really do use the checklist. We've put a lot of work into trying to make it as useful as possible for everybody. Next, please. There's a lot of words here, but this is basically our process for reviewing. So we have a due date for the screening form in which the sponsor provides all of the key information that we need to confirm eligibility. PSRC staff reviews all of that information and either just upfront can make a determination that the project meets all requirements and then approves it to move forward. Or if upon review, there's areas identified where clarifications are made or needed or corrections, we do return that form to the sponsor and coordinate with the sponsor to address those questions or those issues. Generally, I'd say most often we're able to kind of work out issues and clarifications to an acceptable level, but this is just part of the screening form process, is making sure that there's no questions on the topics related to the project's eligibility. And the purpose of us doing this is to make sure that we get all of these issues hammered out early. And if for some reason it's determined that, oh, this project unfortunately isn't eligible to move forward, that we're making that determination before you spend all your time putting together the responses to the evaluation criteria. But as mentioned, we have things set up so that that submitted screening form will be pre-filled when you get to your project's full funding application. This time we are going to allow sponsors to proceed with the parts of the funding application prior to our approval of the screening form. But just note that all of those comments and questions do need to be resolved before the full application is submitted. For those of you who have done this before, this is just a little summary of the changes since the last time we held this competition. The information that we ask has not changed for many years at this point, but a couple things did change in 2024. Project readiness and financial plan, two areas I'm going to talk about in more detail shortly. Used to be scored criteria, and those were changed to eligibility criteria. So they're many of the same questions, but now they're not scored anymore. They are reviewed to confirm that the project meets the requirements and is eligible to move forward. We did, as part of that process in 2024, we did establish much more specific guidelines for what we're looking at when we talk about project readiness. And so I'll talk about that in a couple of slides. But as mentioned, those comments and questions, they have to be resolved before the full application that also includes that information can be submitted. Next, please. So now I'm just going to get into the actual things that we're asking in the screening form. So here, I'll call this general information, but project title, description, and location sounds pretty straightforward. My ask here is that you please just be very clear and concise when providing this information. The project description really should just be a description of the scope of the project. We don't need the justification for the project or the benefits. You'll have where we want that information is where in your responses to the actual evaluation criteria, the scored. But the project description is just what are the scope elements? What will this project do that we are proposing? It also asks about certification acceptance or CA status. This is a designation that the agencies go through WSDOT to attain. And it's basically saying that the sponsor agency has demonstrated understanding of all the federal rules regarding project development and administration for federally funded projects. So an agency either has to have this status to be able to participate in our competitions, or if not, has a CA sponsor. And that just means and this is very common, or I should say not uncommon, and especially with smaller agencies, not to have CA status. But there are a lot of rules and procedures that go with federal funding of transportation projects. So enlisting a CA sponsor is the way that we make sure that kind of somebody's involved who does understand all those rules and can give guidance to the agency that does not have it. Most commonly, WashDOT serves in that role, but it can sometimes be a county or a neighboring jurisdiction that has a stake in the project. Our ask here is not only to identify if your agency doesn't have CA status, who your CA sponsor will be, but we also need confirmation from that sponsor that they know they've been enlisted and are willing and able to serve in that role. So there's a little extra document that we ask for in this case where you need to enlist a CA sponsor. Plan consistency, there's a couple of fronts on the plan consistency question. The first is consistency with the regional transportation plan. I know we've got a new one in progress, but the current adopted one, the 2022 plan, is the one that applies to this competition, since the new one won't be adopted until May. But for any project that meets our regional capacity project thresholds, that means it needs to be specifically listed in the RTP on our financially constrained list. And so if there's a project that is in that category, we ask that it would have an ID number. We ask you to provide that information as something we double check. If a project meets a threshold, that it is on the list. If a project doesn't meet the threshold, we do consider that to be, we call it programmatic. It's still consistent with the RTP. It does not need to be specifically listed. I didn't want to get into a lot of detail about what these thresholds are. We have a whole workshop about that too that we did last year as part of our RTP update. But if you have any questions about whether or not your project needs to be on the list, definitely feel free to reach out and we can confirm that with you. Project also needs to be in or consistent with a PSRC certified comprehensive plan or conditionally certified. If a project is a transit project, it would need to be consistent with applicable transit or state plans. And mainly any jurisdiction that has overlap with the project, if it's not specifically in their plan, we need some demonstration that this project is consistent with the plan and their policies. Next, please. Federal functional classification, if a project is located on a roadway, in order to be able to be funded with federal funds, it needs to be on a road that is classified collector or higher, collector arterial or highway, or there's several categories that are exceptions that are exempt from federal functional classification. So a project on a local street would not be eligible to receive FHW funds. Funds can be requested for a project on a roadway that is planned to be added to the functionally classified network, but isn't yet. So those funds could be awarded. The funds can be programmed in the TIP, but they can't be obligated until that designation has been updated. So if a agency is in that situation where you're requesting funds for something planned to be on the functional classification system but isn't yet, they would need to go through the process to get that designation updated prior to the date of obligation. Next, please. So pedestrian and bicycle considerations, we do, per federal rules, need to explicitly consider them. We have questions asking for existing non-motorized facilities in the project area, and then also ask for identification of additional or new or improved facilities that would be included in the proposed project scope. If the project doesn't have existing non-motorized facilities and none are proposed with the project, in our guidance, there's a list of reasons that need to be, the reason for for that needs to be provided per that guidance. So that's mostly looking at that list and seeing what applies best. Next, please. So project readiness, this is probably the one that we spend the most time on as staff when we're doing our review. Part of what a sponsor needs to demonstrate is that the schedule has been laid out in a way that it's realistic, that the project can deliver the funds for the phase requested in the year requested. So we look at all the major project milestones to make sure that they're meeting kind of our guidelines. So, and just also that the timeline for the project is reasonable. So when I get to, we expect projects to be delivered on time, and reasons for extensions are reasons out of a sponsor agency's control. A schedule that was too tight in the first place is not a reason that is considered by our policies to be out of the region's control. So we put a lot of scrutiny into the schedule, understanding that, and it depends greatly on what funds are being requested and where, but just making sure that we get as much information, full information as we can, and demonstration that that schedule has been thought through. And we have developed some guidelines that we use for that review, just based on the trends that we've seen. We've coordinated with WashDOT in developing these guidelines, and I think those are on the next slide. So here's our little flow chart that is in our guidance. That is what we use as kind of our starting point for determining if a project. So if a project is requesting, say, design funds, PE funds, the project readiness questions are far less than, say, the project is requesting construction funds. If a project is requesting construction funds, that's kind of the, I would say, the most extreme example. We do go through this little flow chart, how far is it in design? If it's pretty far, then that there's more certainty in the dates that are given. If design hasn't started yet or is in its very early stages, our guidelines require that there be more time built into assumptions between when design is finished and right away in construction. So we would encourage you just to go through this flow chart and look at your own project, the conditions of your project. Same with NEPA. There are some questions about if NEPA has started, has there been a kickoff meeting? How much do you know about your NEPA? We know the certain types of projects that are more likely to require more extended NEPA review. So those are all included in the questions that we ask. And so you can see the green boxes based on the yes, no answers to those questions. We have laid out some minimum time between phases. So between right away in construction, mostly, depending on the circumstances, and also between PE and the next phase, depending on the circumstances. So I won't go through that whole flow chart, but we're also happy to answer those questions. And I would say we started this a couple years ago. We went through this in 2024. We didn't have any projects that kind of didn't ultimately make it through based on project readiness, but we did have some sponsors who, when we asked these questions, they kind of thought twice about their schedule and made some adjustments on what the timing of the request. So we take this pretty seriously. We consult with WashDOT if we have any question, and this is probably the thing that we spent the most time kind of talking to sponsors on when we do our review of our process. So go to the next slide, Doug. So this is kind of how we approach it, the project schedule. If the project schedule meets the minimum timeline that's defined in that flowchart guidance, we call it good. We don't ask any more questions. If a sponsor indicates if they don't meet those minimum guidelines, that's not necessarily a deal breaker, but we do ask for an explanation of why a shorter project timeline is justified. We do review that and coordinate very closely with the sponsor on this. And if there's any question, we may defer to WashDOT on if this is a realistic assumption when it comes to the schedule. This is my place to remind or at least make everybody aware that if a project requests funds for and is awarded funds for a later year, and for whatever, the great news, everything went better than expected, or we got to this point a lot faster than we assumed, there generally is opportunity to advance funds from a future year to the current year if a project is ready to go. So our advice is usually if there's question to assume more time, not less time, because there are some opportunities to accelerate funds usually if things go faster. And then my last piece here is project finance. So this first set of bullets are just the rules with our funding requests. So funds can be requested only for a single phase. And when I talk about phase in this context, we're talking about the phases of a project development, design, right-of-way, or construction, generally speaking, for a capital project. And so only one phase. That is a change from how we did things even at the last RTCC. But we were running into a lot of project delays that we were that the data was showing we were potentially incentivizing by awarding multiple phases in consecutive years. In combination with all of the funds, the funding request in combination with the matching funds must be adequate to fully fund the phase for which funding is being requested. So if you're requesting PE, certain amount for PE, the matching funds plus that amount needs to fully fund the cost of PE. And the same for right-of-way and for construction. The funding request can't exceed the maximum amount that I mentioned earlier, and the local match funds need to be at least 13.5% of the total phase cost, called the minimum local match requirement. We also ask for financial documentation that shows that with the funding request that all of the other funds are either secured or reasonably expected is the terminology that we use. And so secured usually means this is in our TIP or our CIP. We have those funds allocated and assigned to this project. For projects that are farther in the future, it is not uncommon for them not to yet be secured in the local TIP, in which case it depends on the circumstances, but we have guidelines for how those matching funds can be demonstrated to be reasonably expected. And generally that means showing us, identifying the source of the revenue, showing historically that this source has had adequate budget to cover the amount that we will need. And here are the steps that we will take to secure funds from this source specifically for this project. So this is probably the other area where we spend the most time making sure that everything is square. We've got really good people who can provide answer questions on this, and we also have our financial constraint guidance is provided on our website. That's all available to help you provide the best information you can in this category. The last thing that we ask for on the finance side is we do need a full project budget given in the application. So not only for the phase that for which you're requesting funds, but we need the budget information for all of the other phases. So if you're requesting PE, we still need a cost estimate. If it has a right-of-way phase, we need that identified and what the cost is, and then same with construction. Knowing that they're estimates, but we do need the full cost of the project provided, not just the phase for which funds are being requested. Next, I think might start to be you, Doug. I don't know if I have another one or not.
That's it for you, Jennifer. You can hand it back to me, but I don't see any hands raised at the moment. But Michelle from King County Metro is wondering, related to the federally classified roads requirement. She was asking, would a transit project on a local street be eligible?
So I am going to, this is probably my first of many answers that are going to be, it depends. It probably depends on what the project is. So I would say in this case, for this competition in particular, we definitely need to show that this project is benefiting a rural center. And if the improvements are to the street itself, Probably not, but it depends if they're, access, non-motorized access to transit, possibly yes. So I think this is one where we would just want you to maybe reach out and give us the specifics of your project, and then we can give you a much clearer answer.
Perfect. All right, thank you. And so now I'm going to talk about the evaluation criteria.
Oh, wait, we got Peter has his hand up.
Oh, very good. Go ahead, Peter.
Just a quick one for eligibility. Are there any significant differences for the planning type projects with the eligibility?
I think probably the quick answer is not really. I think, whether it's a capital project or planning, we're looking for the connection to a rural center. And then, of course, the capital projects, the very specific scope elements have to be eligible for STBG. But I think once again, if there's something specific, Peter, we can definitely have that conversation with you, but
So
I
no
can't think of
lower
anything
funding limits
generally
or
that
match
says
requirements or anything like that.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, there's not a lower funding limit or match requirement or anything like that.
No, no, no. All of the federally funded projects have to have that minimum match of 13.5%, but the type of project it is, that's the same.
Okay, great. And
any other questions before I stop talking? And of course, we're gonna have time throughout, and so if you think of anything, either put it in the chat or yeah, we have a small enough group. It seems like the raised hand will work just fine for us, Doug. So, okay, well, thanks. I'm gonna now turn it over to Doug.
excellent. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And yeah, you can cut me off if any urgent questions come up. Otherwise, we can tackle them at the end. So actually, we do have one more before I get going here. Can funds be obligated to FTA once awarded? I guess flexed or transferred to FTA because these are FHWA funds.
Yes, if we don't see it as much with RTCC projects, but if a transit agency is awarded FHWA funds, and if that were to happen in this competition, those funds could be flexed to FTA, just like with our other competitions.
Perfect. All right, so let's dive into the evaluation criteria components. So these are the parts of the application that are reviewed and scored after we confirm those eligibility details in the screening form that you'll provide first. And there's 5 categories: local and regional policy support, circulation, mobility, and accessibility, system performance and innovative solutions, community support, and safety. And so now I'm going to go through each of these in a little more detail. So that first scored criteria component asks how your project or planning study supports the relevant plans and policies and the character of the rural town center. And this section is worth 20 points out of the total possible 100 points. The first question is worth 10 of those points, and it asks about how the project or planning study supports adopted plans and policies for the center, or how it furthers the local vision for the center. And we ask you to provide citations and a copy of the plan or policies that you reference for that question. And then the remaining 2 questions are each worth 5 points, and they ask how the project fits the intended character of the center or corridor, and then also if you're partnering or coordinating with any other agencies on the project or the planning study. And the second component is all about circulation, mobility, and accessibility, and it's worth 30 points. And it starts off by asking how your planning study or your capital project will improve access to or circulation within the rural town center by doing things like removing barriers to mobility and things like that. And that's worth half of those points, so 15 for that first question. And then the remaining 3 questions are each worth 5. Questions pertaining to if and how the project or planning study is going to benefit multiple travel modes, how it might improve the active transportation situation or enhance the pedestrian environment, and lastly, if it will contribute to any commute trip reduction efforts or trip reduction efforts in general. And then we get into the third component. It's all about performance and innovation. This is worth 20 points. The first question is worth 10 and asks how your planning study or the capital project will improve system reliability and efficiency for moving people and or freight and goods. And then the remaining questions are each worth 5 points. And we ask how the project will maximize efficiency in the long term. And we ask if there's anything particularly innovative included in the scope of the planning study or the project. And then the next component is community support, and it's worth 10 points total. And here's where we'll ask you to identify which population groups the project or the planning study will serve, describe any disparities or gaps in the transportation system that those population groups are experiencing, and how the project or planning study will improve that. So that's worth 5 of those 10 points. And then we ask about the outreach process, and that's where we want to see a description of what the outreach process is and how, and point out any specific communication with the population groups that you identified that you've had, and how that communication has influenced the development of the project. So that's a 2-part question, and that also makes up the other 5 points for that section. And then the last component here, accounting for the remaining 20 points, is safety. And here we're going to first ask you to describe the safety issues that the project or planning study is going to address. That's worth 10 of the points. And then the remaining questions ask about how it will help protect vulnerable users, reduce reliance on enforcement, and or design for decreased speeds. Then the last question is about if your agency has an adopted safety plan or any specific safety-related policies, and if so, how those plans and policies will inform the project or the planning study. So that covers the scored evaluation criteria. Now we'll take a look at the schedule. And so we released the call last week on the 20th. And after today's workshop, the next milestone will be the screening form process, that eligibility screening form. And we'll need sponsors to provide those to PSRC by March 6th, as Jennifer said. And after we receive those, our PSRC staff team will review each of them in the order that they come in and return any comments to sponsors by March 27th. So we'll get our comments back to you by March 27th, probably sooner, but again, depending on when you turn them into us and how many we get.
Yeah, Doug, can I interrupt for a second to say,
Sure.
Encourage, if you do get it in earlier, we will prioritize getting it to you earlier. But if we get everything kind of at the deadline, then that's kind of the latest that we would be able to commit to returning comments.
Yeah, definitely an incentive to get it to us sooner rather than later. And of course, as you get our comments, we're available to have answer any questions that you might have about what we've said in our comments back to you. After receiving those comments, then sponsors are going to be ready to complete their final applications, and it is absolutely essential that any comments we provide from that screening form review are incorporated into the application, and then you get that application submitted no later than April 17th. So that's the due date for final applications. And at that point, the PSRC staff team will score them. We'll convene a project selection committee, and then that committee will gather on May 6th virtually, like we're doing today, to see presentations from the sponsors. And then after the presentations, the committee will get together and review and make a recommendation on which projects to receive funding at a meeting or meetings on May 26th, and we'll hold May 27th in case more time is needed. But then once the project selection committee comes to their recommendation, PSRC's Transportation Policy Board will release the project recommendations for public comment. That'll be in June. And then ultimately, the recommended projects will go to PSRC's Executive Board for final approval in July. And then after that milestone, for the sponsors of projects with award recommendations, our staff will coordinate with them in July and August to get those funds programmed into the regional and statewide TIPs.
Do we put any questions about the schedule or about the process overall?
No, good.
Doesn't look like it. Okay.
All right. Excellent. Okay, so now moving on to resources and guidance. So we really strongly encourage you to go to our RTCC webpage for more information about everything that we're covering today. In particular, we want to point you to our checklists with detailed instructions and guidance for completing your screening forms and applications. We also have documents outlining the eligibility information that Jennifer covered, the project evaluation criteria that I went over, and our financial constraint guidance that provides examples of what can be considered secured funds and reasonably expected funds and types of documentation that you can use to demonstrate their availability. And now I'm going to actually pivot away from our slide deck and pull up that website, and I can just show some examples of that. Okay. Are you seeing the website?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So this is what it looks like. You must have all found it by now because this is where we put the information about our workshop today. But then if you continue scrolling down beneath that, there'll be this pull down menu where we have all of these resources and guidance available for you. In particular, I've got some of the key ones pulled up here. So you've got the eligibility document that includes this beautiful map that we've made. The evaluation criteria, this is what I just covered, and it goes into more detail about each of the questions and how many points are allocated to them and some other background and details about them. And you'll notice there's two sections. The first one is the planning studies, and then halfway through we have a section 2 about the capital projects. Here's that financial constraint guidance. Should look familiar to any of you who have participated in any of our previous funding competitions over the years. But
or programmed in the tip. It's all the same guidance.
Yeah. So we have that here for you. Please definitely refer to this as you're preparing your documentation. Make sure that you're providing something that'll work. And then the last thing here towards the bottom here, we have the screening form checklist and guidance and the application checklist and guidance. So I'm going to pull up the screening form checklist and guidance. And this is really key for you to start this process. In fact, when you open it up, the very first thing includes a link to the online application and screening form portal. And I'm going to show you what that looks like here in a moment. But this is how you access the actual online form. It's at a website called FormSite that we've used to put this together.
Looks
So
like
definitely.
David has a question, Doug.
Okay. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, hi, Doug. Looking back at that eligibility map, it just caught my eye. It shows that Kingston is not eligible because it's dark gray as if it's part of a cougar. So I think we need to have a correction.
You are correct, David.
Oh, is that true? Okay, so it's not part of the continuous urban growth area.
No.
I don't. Well, I guess let's double check that. But I think Kingston has. You've received.
No, Kingston is eligible.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, excellent. Thank you for pointing that out. We'll make sure to fix that.
Yeah, because that map is a little bit different than has been shown before. So it just caught me a second of noticing it. Thank you.
Yeah, good eye. Sorry for the confusion on that. Okay. Oh, and so Jeffrey is asking, I'm going to get to this in a moment, Jeffrey, about the website. So I'll just hold tight and I'll get to that.
He's asking about, since everybody can't see that, he's asking about login credentials. And so
yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly not needed for the PSRC website, but when we get to the online application and screening form portal, there are credentials needed for that. So I guess now would be a good time to pivot to that. So when you open up that screening form checklist, again, that first page when you open it up includes this link to the portal. Go ahead and open it, and it's going to bring you to FormSite. And yes, absolutely, you'll need login credentials, and Your login and password for this are going to be the same as you would use for our online tip applications. The only difference is you would need to add a hashtag or pound sign to the very end of your password here. It needed a special character in FormSite, but your usual login and password that you use for our tip applications will be what you use here. And if you get stuck or having trouble, please reach out to us and we can assist you with that. Okay, so here's what it looks like once I log in. And so when you're going to start your screening form, the first thing you'll do is hit this Start New button. And it's going to bring you to the first page. And this is where you would start by choosing the eligibility screening form option. So there's two options. And just for expediency today, I'm gonna go through this in more detail with some that I've already started. So let me start over here. And you'll notice that if it has this yellow eye, you can open it up and edit it. So I'm going to open up one that I've already started working on. And again, it's taking me to that first page where I have eligibility screening forms selected. And one thing I want to just point out real quick right now is you'll see that there's a total of 18 pages in this form site mechanism that we're using here. And as we go through this, you'll see that some of these pages are skipped when you're going through the screening form, and that's intentional. And I'll point that out when we get to those. But that's totally intentional. The reason is because the screening form and application are all one big form. And the way we've set this up is that when you, the screening form component, those questions, those will only show up when you start by selecting the screening form button. And so it'll skip the pages that are related to the application, which is primarily those scored evaluation criteria. But by setting it up this way, once you've gone through the screening form process and submitted your information, you'll be able to then go back in and reopen it, choose the grant application option, and then you'll see that all of your information that you already submitted as part of the screening form is already there. So it will certainly save you from having to re-enter all that information. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly here, but I'll select eligibility screening form, and that's going to then take me to page 2. So just kind of our landing page, confirming that you're starting on a screening form. And it just, in case you haven't found it yet, points you back to that checklist and resource document that we want you to be referring to as you're going through this. So page 3, then it brings you to our general project information page. And this is where you'll enter your project name. And then here's also where you would select whether you're going to choose a standalone planning project or a capital project. And depending on what you choose, it'll bring up a certain set of questions later on in the form when you're actually doing the application. But so here's your place to choose that option, or whichever one you're going to pursue. And then also, this is where you would answer that question about the RTP consistency, provide the lead agency info, and then any applicable partnerships that might be involved. And then at the bottom here is where we ask you to identify if you have the CA status, and note that if you have another agency serving as your CA sponsor, you'll need to provide confirmation, either an email or a letter from the sponsor agency that they're willing to do that and have the capacity to serve in that role. And there's a file upload on page 14 where you can provide that, or you can just email it to me directly, either way. So going through, now we're on page 4. This is where we just ask you to provide contact information for the primary person filling out the form and an alternate. Then page 5, we have our project description and location. And this is where you would provide, again, a clear and concise project scope description. It's limited to 300 words, so we're not looking for a justification or anything We just want to know a clear description of the project and what it's going to actually do. Then you also provide the location of the project and identify the rural town center that the project is supporting. Next is the federal functional class page, and here's where you identify the functional class that the facility or project is located on, or let us know if it meets one of the definitions for these exceptions. And Kaylon on our team is the person to reach out to if you have any questions about this as you're going through it.
Hey, Doug, can we pause here? I just want to point out this, what we are looking for. We get this question sometimes. We know sometimes local agencies kind of have their version or their own classifications, but for the purposes of these federal funding competitions, what we're looking at is the kind of the FHWA approved functional classification of a facility.
Excellent clarification. And next brings us to the bicycle and pedestrian accommodation. So here's where you'll identify both the existing facilities in the project area and then the facilities that are proposed to be included in the scope. And you can also identify if your project meets any of these exemption criteria. You can indicate that here as well at the bottom. And then moving on, local plan consistency. And here's where you identify the plan that the project is identified in, or if it's not specifically identified, describe how the project is consistent with the applicable local comprehensive plan. Okay, and so here, notice we're on page 8, and because we're in the screening form, next we're going to skip to page 11. So pages 9 and 10 are the evaluation criteria, and that's where you would respond to those criteria, those scored questions when you go to the complete application. And so just know that that's intentional. That's just part of how this works. And again, it allows us to set this up in a way that you won't have to re-enter all the information that you provided in your screening form. So in the screening form, your next move will be go to project readiness. That's page 11. And here's where you provide the information on for all the project phases so that we can ensure the schedule adheres to our minimum timelines that Jennifer described earlier. And you'll respond with information about the status and timing of each of those milestones. And depending on what options you select, some questions will appear. So it's very dynamic that way. And then that will take us. Oh,
hey, Doug, I just want to point out this field at the very bottom of this form is the place that is where we would ask for any explanations that are specific to your project that you want to make sure that you communicate to us. So it doesn't need to be completed if kind of your schedule meets all of our milestones, but if for whatever reason it doesn't, this is where you would provide that explanation.
Page 12 is the funding request. So here's where you enter the phase and the year and the amount that you're requesting, and also indicate if your project has received PSRC funds previously. If so, you see then you could provide the project's TIP ID. I'll say no for my example. And then here we get to the financial plan. And here's where we need to see that the requested amount and the match amount combined are going to equal the total cost of the phase, and that total will fully fund the phase. And remember, the minimum match requirement must be 13.5%, but you can do more. And we really need budget information for all phases of the project in addition to the phase for the funding that's being requested. So you'll show any earlier or later phases here as well. And we need the budget information for those other phases, even if they're future phases. And we're also needing actual or estimated completion dates for each of those phases. So this is where all that financial information comes in. So for my example here, I have, we're going to be requesting construction funds with the minimum local match. And this amount and timing will correspond with what I entered on the previous page that was just specific about my funding request. So this should have all the
But
funding.
it's going to be completed later than 2026.
Oh, yeah, good catch. I just
Have
like to
that project readiness hat on.
I like to get things going quick. Okay. Oh, and another thing I'll point out now, you'll notice you can skip ahead and forward. Sometimes it won't let you skip forward if you haven't answered all the questions that are required. But in the middle here is the save progress button. I definitely encourage, and it confirms your information was saved up here. Definitely encourage you to save often as you're going through this, just in case anything happens. Everything you've done will be saved. So we get to page 14. This is the supporting documentation page where you'll upload any supporting information that demonstrates the additional funds needed for the phase you're requesting are going to be there, that they're either secured or reasonably expected. And also any other supporting documentation we discussed, like the CA confirmation, you could upload that here. Or again, you can just email that to me as well. And then
you can upload any supporting documentation on this page. We definitely need the financial, but if you've got anything else, there's no rule that says you can't also upload that on this page.
And that's going to bring us to page 17. And again, pages 15 and 16 were skipped because those were pages that pertain to the application. And so when you're done with your screening form, you'll get here. Again, reminding you that the revisions that we provide you are going to need to be incorporated into the final application. And then last kind of warning before you hit the official submit button. And once you're, confirm you've got all the information you want to include, you can go ahead and hit submit. And then both you and PSRC will get an email with a PDF containing all your responses to those screening form questions. So I submitted it. Success.
I'll add a little bit something here, Doug. Once you've submitted, you can't access that form again through our system. But if you're before the deadline and either you accidentally hit submit or hit submit, and now I thought of something else I need to add, as long as you're before the deadline, if you can let us know that, and we are able to release it back to you if needed. But we need to do that administratively. But just wanted to mention that does happen occasionally.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see that here when I go back into FormSite now with my login, you'll see that screening form I'm just working on is showing up here. And now that it's got this green check mark, there's no longer gives me that ability to edit it unless on the back end PSRC staff change that and release it like Jennifer was just saying. And so for now, I'm going to just use the second project for the grant application component here that I had that one teed up just to help expedite this demo. But so this time when I open it up, I'm going to click on grant application, right? And then you'll see what you'll see when you do this is that all the info from the screening form is contained in there, and it's going to go through all those same questions. You can just confirm that everything is correct and incorporate any changes based on the comments that we provided. And then because I've selected a capital project, once I get to, let's see, once I get past page 8 here. Yeah, okay. Now it's going to take me to page 10, which is these are those scored evaluation criteria questions for the capital project track. So if it says you've selected a planning study, you'd be on page 9. And if that was not your intention, you'd have to go back to the page 3 and choose the correct option. But I wanted a capital project, so it's showing me now all those criteria questions that I went through specific for the capital project track. So they're all contained on this one page. And then I'll confirm that I have the project readiness and the financial details correct. And incorporate any other changes from PSRC's review. And then same with all the funding information. And then here, okay, yeah. And then 15 and 16, here's option to explain any additional aspects of your project that weren't overtly addressed in the application criteria earlier that you want to include. And there's no points here, but it is an opportunity to provide additional information, as well as upload additional files that might be useful in your application, maps or those kinds of things. And then that'll take us to the final review page, where then you can go ahead and submit your application. And again, you'll get an email with the details. And I think that's it for the demo. I'll go ahead and switch back to the slide deck. And I guess that brings us to the end, Jennifer. So happy to answer any questions. Oh, and you are muted.
I was pointing out that we have a question from Julie. Now you're muted.
Sorry. Okay, unmuted. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Doug. I'm Julie Wilshins with King County Roads. I appreciate you all walking us through these materials. Would it be possible to make available to applicants like a Word document or a PDF that has all of the screening form questions so we could kind of work on them collaboratively before getting into the form that, you know, sometimes requires us to complete everything before we can go to the next page?
We don't have an editable document we can provide you, but if you pull up that screening form checklist, that does have all of the information in a that you would be able to pull into an editable document if you wanted. And
Okay, so it summarizes all the questions that, okay, got it.
Yeah, and it's in the order that it should be, in the order that you'll find them on the screen. So we try to align that very specifically with the actual document that you'll be filling out.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks. More opportunity to point people to the checklist and guidance.
We can't emphasize it enough. Any other questions?
Rhonda.
Hi. In regard to the match, can you go over any options for in-kind matches and what that process would look like?
I think that is so specific, Rhonda. There's a lot of it depends with that. So and actually the actual circumstances we would probably coordinate with WashDOT on as far as so depending on what it depends is. I know you and I owe each other a conversation that we can discuss that specifically because we don't see it very often, and we know there are some specific circumstances where it's accepted, but it doesn't happen often enough that we have kind of just standard set of rules that we can point to. So
Thank
but
you.
definitely can talk to you more about that.
Looks like we're all caught up with the question and answer box. Any other hands raised? Let's see. Okay.
Well, we do have lots of names sprinkled throughout our guidance. If you have specific questions, especially in the screening form on any of the information that we're requiring, always feel free to reach out to Doug or to me if you have any questions, and we will do our best to respond quickly.